Good afternoon. Welcome everyone. My name's Carolyn McVean. I'm the Parliamentary Librarian and I'm here to welcome you all here. But before we do that, on behalf of the Parliament of Victoria and its members, we acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we stand here today. We pay our respects to them, their culture, their elders past, present, and anyone else from First Nations people who are here today. We welcome them as well. Welcome to our seminar about investing in the medical technology boom. We're presenting this jointly with ATSE, which is the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. And we'll do a plug. We do about 4 of these a year, so look out, watch this space. Today, our moderator is Sandra Kentish, who's the chair of the ATSE Victorian Division, and also Redmond Barry, Distinguished Professor with the University of Melbourne. So when Sandra comes up, they'll do the presentations, and then you'll see Deborah at the end with a roving microphone. So if you've got any questions, please get them ready. And off we'll go, and thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Carolyn, and it is my great pleasure to moderate this very timely presentation, because Melbourne is the life sciences capital of Australia, with more than 70% of the nation's leading biotech and medtech companies based here. But are we realising the full potential of this industry's economic benefits? Where and how can we do better? How do we drive commercialisation of Australian-developed medical technology? These are the issues that are at the forefront of the presentation that we're going to give today. We have 3 outstanding speakers. They're all fellows of the Academy. I'm going to introduce all 3 of them and then leave it up to them to run things for themselves. So our first speaker will be Professor Errol Harvey. Errol was until recently the CEO of the Aikenhead Centre for Medical Discovery, and he is Head of Strategy and Translation at the Bionics Institute Australia. He's made outstanding contributions to Australia via his unwavering support for research, commercialisation and entrepreneurship. And I'll call out in particular his founding of the company Minifab, which makes polymer-based microfluidic lab-on-a-chip diagnostic devices for clients around the world. Our second speaker is Professor Madhu Bhaskaran. She's the co-lead of the Functional Materials and Microsystems Research Group at RMIT and Deputy Director of the ARC Hub for Connected Sensors for Health and, I've got note here that's not right, Health and... It is correct. Okay, sorry. Health and Node. She's Director and the Chief Investigator of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Transformative Meta-Optical Systems, and she's developed stretchable skin-like electronic devices as well as a range of other sensors. Our third speaker is Professor David Graydon. He's Clifford Chair of Neural Engineering in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and the Graham Clark Institute for Biomedical Engineering at the University of Melbourne. He's also co-director of the Victorian MedTech Skills and Devices Hub and director of the ARC Training Centre in Cognitive Computing for Medical Technologies. And his main research interests are in understanding how the brain processes information and how best to present information using medical bionics such as the bionic eye and the bionic ear. So as I say, they're going to give short presentations and there will be time for questions and answers afterwards. So I'll pass to Errol.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And thanks for the, well, there's us. Thanks for the chance to talk to you about MedTech. And I want to start with just some facts and figures, just to give you a little bit of context about how important this is in the Victorian economy. You can have a look at this through the recordings later, but a couple of the headline points. In health technologies broadly, which is the sort of the biggest umbrella term for this area, it's around 5.5 billion sector value add to the Victorian economy, but more importantly, 18% annual growth over the last 5-year period. So it's still accelerating. Over 4,000 companies in Victoria. roughly more than 50,000 people employed in the area, and a large chunk of that are in research. In fact, if you look at research and clinical trials as an economic activity within Victoria, it's very substantial, and we rank in the world as a key place to do those sorts of things. In terms of exports, 3.23 billion, and you can see the rankings there. So there's lots of other data and stats, but I guess just to highlight that health technologies are a major part of the Victorian economy. MedTech, which is what we're talking about today, is a fastest growing subsector of the health tech sector. And it employs around 20,000 Victorians, roughly 650 companies, and they range from SMEs and startups all the way through to contract manufacturers, global supply chain type people. So what's MedTech? I want to differentiate MedTech from biotech in particular. Biotech you will have heard a lot of. That's the Moderna mRNA facility, CSL, a big global multinational based here in Australia. We would call more biotech type companies. We also separate it from pharma. That's another sector. So MedTech is around technologies, and this is a web definition, technologies that diagnose, treat, and improve a person's health and well-being. They're typically manufactured products or software-based products or services. Now, if we look at examples of where MedTech is manufactured here in Victoria, companies are doing things like a novel sterile wipe. It's much more effective than most other sterile wipes for cleaning down surfaces in hospitals. All the way through to, it was mentioned, the cochlear implant, invented here in Melbourne, manufactured in Australia, global company. We've also got new advanced materials companies, people like Polinovo. This is a company which was spun out of Syro around 20 years ago. Its market value is over $1 billion now, and we're expecting some nice announcements from FDA soon around some of their products. All the way through to small mum and pup operations who make beds or chairs or furniture and stuff like that. So that's MedTech. They're the kind of people who are involved in the jobs and the businesses here in Victoria. One of the things that we'll be talking about a lot today is around innovation and the new technologies. One of the things that's frustrated me over my career is that in spite of amazing innovation and very inventive people here in Australia, the patience and the use of that technology in Australia lags the rest of the world, typically by 5 or 10 years, if at all. Often we will invent things here and they're never available for patients within the Australian system. So why is that? And that's something that I really want to highlight through this next 5 minutes of talk. One of the key problems that faces local manufacturers is procurement. It's all very well inventing and developing and patenting something, but if nobody buys your product, then it's not much use to you at all. And health within Australian context is dominated by the government, where the public sector pays for more than 2/3 of health within Australia, and that's state and Commonwealth. And so it's the buying behaviour of public sector, the Department of Health, which is the one that dominates whether local manufacturers can get onto local sales or not. Now, we've got a real push against local suppliers inadvertently because, rightly, Victorian public spending is geared towards cost savings. We've got an unaffordable health system which is growing in cost all the time. And so the pressures are all around long-term contracts and driving costs down. And so Victorian SMEs struggle to access forward procurement opportunities. We tried to find the data about how significant this is. And the Department of Health doesn't even know how much money it's spending on locally manufactured medtech. We got one of the largest health authorities in Victoria to do some numbers. They spend over $800 million per annum on medtech, and the percentage on Victorian manufactured product is less than 3%. It used to be, before COVID, just around 4.5%. It's trending to 2%. It's going down. And so we're finding that the major spenders of the funding, the procurement, are not looking at local suppliers. This is in contrast to many other jurisdictions where they have support systems for SMEs around local health procurement. And you can look at Canada, for example, as CanHealth has got a very good program at encouraging local procurement. Other jurisdictions will ask if it's made locally and the public sector chooses not to buy the local product, you need to put up a justification as to why. Ours is completely the opposite. So this, I think, gives us some opportunities. The kind of issues that we're talking about here are similar to the conversations that we had in defence some time ago. We, in Australia, spend a large amount of money on defence and realised that our local procurement, and therefore our local capability, was dying. And so the Commonwealth Government in particular realised that it needed to do something active around this. We can learn from that model. So now within defence, there are roughly a dozen local manufacturing advocates working in defence to spot the opportunities and then advocate for local procurement to manufacture. And there's some other tools. The Defence Material Technology Centre, DMTC, was an out-of-defence body which was created and has been very, very successful in this. One of the other issues for the sector, and I mentioned it about the small mum-and-pup type organisations, is that although we've got a couple of large companies, the biggest load of manufacturers are small enterprises, often family-owned. They have difficulty in speaking with a single voice to be heard, and I think that there's an opportunity for us to bring together a connected SME industry voice. And so in the last days of the Australian MedTech Manufacturing Centre, which was a Victorian government initiative, it finished this year, but it seed-funded the Australian MedTech Manufacturing Alliance, which is going to be run by BioMelbourne Network. And it's the start at trying to coordinate a collected voice so that we can hear properly from the sector. I think also we've got some opportunity for leveraging local content rules. In the construction phase of hospitals and so on, we use it very effectively. Why don't we use similar sorts of approaches around local content when we're purchasing medtech? And I think also there's an opportunity for programmatic approach to uplift supplier capabilities. Again, we've done that in other sectors, in tourism, in the wine industry, where we had, lots of smaller players that needed to compete on the national platforms. So, look, if we can somehow change government procurement from 2% to 10%, then that's hundreds of millions of dollars back into the Victorian manufacturing economy. And that's more jobs. And what it also does is it strengthens our local manufacturers to be more competitive in exports. And I think that's a health outcome that's really worth looking at. And it's going to need some leadership to get it to happen. The next speaker is going to tell us a little bit about a case study in the innovation and entrepreneurship space. So, Madhu, I'll hand over the lectern to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Errol. All right. taking a bit of a turn, and a lot of these are more of personal stories and personal experiences through this entire space. So I'm an electronics engineer based at RMIT University. We make technologies predominantly focused towards healthcare and aged care. These are quite varied, and like Errol kindly introduced MedTech for us. As you can see, these can be anything. So it could be something which is a skin-like sensor which you're wearing on your skin, and that's monitoring what's happening around you. But it could also be monitoring what's happening within you. So monitoring what's happening within your body, monitoring body parameters like skin temperature, your ECG, your oxygen levels, and so on. Sometimes they are not wearables. Sometimes they are what we call nearables, which is where sensors are being placed in the environment close to you or near you and gathering information about you. So in this particular case, they are sensors which we place on a mattress on which people are resting over the course of the night, and that's gathering specific information about them. I'll expand on that particular example as I go through. And then some of them are diagnostics. COVID in some ways, and now I don't have to explain what a rat test is. Everybody knows what a rat test is. We had to undergo quite a lot of them, unfortunately. But turns out you can get a lot more information from your saliva and from other body fluids than just whether you've been exposed to COVID or not. So we kind of work in that kind of space as well, where we're trying to look at not having to have a blood test, but maybe you can use your saliva and other body fluids to understand what's happening within your body. Almost everything is pitched towards the notion of prevention is better than cure. And that's, again, something which is a bit of a game changer, because a lot of money and a lot of effort is predominantly sitting in the something has happened now, how do we cure that particular problem? But then a lot more for the future generation has to ideally sit in, let's actually do something proactively to prevent that problem from actually occurring. The particular example I wanted to focus on was actually an all-Victorian partnership. So this is a product which we launched a couple of years ago, which is a nearable called Remy. It's pitched specifically at the aged care market. And for anyone who's gone into an aged care home, you would know most of them are still pen and paper. There's no technology in there. There's still the app habit of going and checking in on people during the course of the night by opening the door every hour on the hour and checking is the person in bed or not in bed. The biggest risk is, of course, falls. And if somebody falls out of bed, if they're lucky, they'll be found in the next hourly check. But if something else goes wrong in some other room, then might be a few hours before you find them. Needless to say, it's severely understaffed. So really trying to optimize the amount of care which the carers can give by being at the right place at the right time is where we think technology can come in. So I have technologies which are really thin and which are conformal and flexible and stretchable, thin electronics. And this company, Sleeptide, which is an SME, reached out to me in 2018 asking me if I can take those electronics and put them on a mattress surface. So the idea here being, if you have sensors across a mattress, you're actually sensing if a person is in bed. You're sensing if they are at the edge of the bed and at the risk of falling out of bed. And you're also sensing their posture. So pressure source is a big concern. So you try and understand their posture to know whether you need to turn them around. And all of this goes to a central dashboard. So the carer is not running from room to room every hour, but is looking at a central dashboard. And hopefully they just have to be there at the right place at the right time rather than disturbing everyone's sleep. We also worked with Sleep Easy, who's actually a mattress manufacturer. So they gave us a lot of insights about what kind of materials are acceptable, what's the entire process by which you can upscale something, what kind of cost point is something which people are willing to bear. I come from a lab where we use gold and platinum because not just because they are nice materials, but also because, to be honest, they are nice materials. They don't oxidize. So obviously, we can't have a sensor on a bed which is with gold and platinum. So we had to reimagine the way we approach technologies. I come from a researcher background, but trying to make that leap from something which works in a lab to something which works out in real life and is actually acceptable at a cross point, that was a journey for myself. But like I said, we worked really well with the manufacturer, and that was critical, having them much earlier in the piece. And we developed this technology where we can mass manufacture sensors which can go on a fabric. So basically, they look like this. A picture is 1,000 words, a prop is 10,000. So this is basically a medical-grade mattress protector. These are the sensors which sit on the other side of it. And essentially, what that then allows you to do is sense a person's presence, position, and posture in bed over the course of the night. It's actually on a trial with the Victorian aged care homes here, and hopefully it makes its way further steps out into the market. But we've had massive and unfortunately much bigger interest from overseas as well. So people in Japan, people in Hong Kong, and in Singapore, where probably the bigger markets have been and the bigger interest has been. And they actually want a home care model. So not an aged care model, but a home care model. So it's kind of pivoting into two different products now, one pitched for aged care and one where you can have an app and check in on the status of your own parents or your grandparents. One other thing here is just an example to show you how cross-disciplinary and how many sectors need to come together to develop a product. We had to work quite closely with designers as well. So they worked directly with the end user, tried to understand what does a dashboard need to look like, what do the carers want, what will actually help them make the right decisions. Alarm fatigue is huge, so you don't want alarms going off because people are triggered by false alarms all the time. So how do they want that dashboard to look? Where do the sensors need to sit? I'm a big advocate for passionate advocate for gender diversity. So how do people sleep? Do men sleep differently to women? How do we make sure that the product actually works for all kinds of genders? But beyond Neurables, we are fortunate to work with quite a few other medtech and translation commercialization partners as well. So as you can see, it's quite a few different various things. We have Neurables. We also have a lot of wearables which you can wear on your skin, which is monitoring what's happening within your body. Things which can resolve dry eye disease, ultrasound imaging. There are quite a few different examples over there in terms of the different SMEs we can work with. And all these are companies which have actually come up in the last few years. So we have these companies coming over to us and trying to develop their first prototype, something which they can take, get more investment from the investors, and then actually make its way out to the market. It's phenomenal to have all these wonderful problems to solve and also to work with all these various commercialization partners, but each one is almost a similar journey. And I guess that's what I'll kind of touch on in my challenges kind of slide. A word on the facility. So everything which I do is actually done in a very sophisticated clean room type environment. So as you can see, these are clean rooms which are multi-million-dollar facilities where you're gowned up and you're making these tiny, tiny devices. So one pain point which we kind of came through once we actually made a few devices. We make 20 of them, 30 of them, 40 of them. We started having companies coming back to us saying, we now want 300 of these, we want 1,000 of these to run clinical trials. They talk to a manufacturer. Most manufacturers start at 10,000. So they say, come to me when you have an order for 10,000 devices. I don't have a need for anything less than that. So thankfully, and thanks to Victorian government for this one, we actually got funded to produce what's called a medtech prototyping facility. So what this one is basically it's set up in RMIT University. It's almost up and running, another few months and we should be up and running. But it's essentially pitched at bridging that gap which sits between you having made a few prototypes to now you actually having the ability to make, before manufacturing, just making thousands of them or 2,000 of them. So as you can see, that's the unmet need. Having the ability to bridge that gap where most of the prototypes didn't fall across because you're too young for a manufacturer, but you're outgrown that research lab which is making a few devices for you. And so thank you. And we're hoping that kind of bridges the gap in some way. In terms of opportunity, so as I mentioned, it's all about breaking the silos. And unfortunately, we're still in that kind of a system where we all only work in tiny silos, academia, industry, manufacturing, design. Every forum I go to, we're always talking about this, but anything which helps us come together and actually break those silos. As you can see, every product requires so many sectors working together. Almost all of them undergo the same kind of journey, which is around navigating the funding pathways, which is, one grant funds you for 3 years, but then what happens to you after that? And that's, again, a pain point which keeps occurring again and again, something which helps them take you through the entire journey from the lab to the market. End user engagement, awareness building, like I mentioned, but then like the aged care, for instance, a lot of them are staff who were trained back in their 60s and 70s in university. So for them to be able to embrace technology and reskill themselves is something which is critically important. And that is not just reskilling, but is also skills training. And I think that perfectly sets it up for David to come and talk about that.
Hey, thank you very much, Madhu. So I would like to start off by talking about the skills training that we've been setting up as a joint initiative between the University of Melbourne, RMIT Swinburne, and the Aikenhead Centre for Medical Discovery, or ACMD, the new building that's just going up over there at St Vincent's Hospital. This is funded by the Victorian government. And I'm, as Sandra mentioned, I'm a co-director of this. So the key initiatives of the VMH is the ACMD Navigator and the ACMD Academy. The ACMD Navigator is trying to facilitate collaboration between academia, government, industry, and probably what's missing there is the students, the ones who are there to learn. But then also we have the ACMD Academy that's trying to address the skills education gaps. And this is the role mainly of the partner universities, but also of the hub itself can deliver some courses. So just a bit more detail. In the ACMD Navigator, we're looking to connect emerging talent with industry professionals to create career pathways. And one of the main reasons for this is that a blocking point of the medtech industry really expanding in Victoria is the skills gaps that exist. So within our own research translation, there has been a need for companies to literally to go overseas. Synchron is a good example of that. You may have heard for a brain-machine interface device. It is now based in New York and it recently closed down in Victoria because of partly because of the need for the manufacturing skills that exist in the United States and also some within Europe. Even the United States doesn't have all that's needed. And then what we don't want is for the industry to not grow because of the lack of skills. So can we create within Victoria the skilled individuals that are needed to reduce that need to go overseas, or perhaps to bring people from overseas into Victoria? So this is guided through the development of sector reports. So MTP Connect, which is the MedTech and Pharmaceuticals Industry Growth Program, that is sort of pivoted in its role recently, but they've done a number of studies looking at the skills gaps, and that led to our proposal to create this hub. Since then, we've published a roadmap that shows that these are the key areas where we need to develop the skills. And the main areas that came up there the main one is the regulatory requirements, the regulatory environment, quality management systems, and so on, that at university can be taught generally at a theoretical level, but often when hitting the coalface, there isn't that experience that companies really need. So that's one example. So the idea also is to co-design these courses. Universities, we don't want to develop courses that are really irrelevant to industry. So that engagement through the Navigator is a very important part to ensure that we get the input from industry, but also, critically, that industry also gives back by taking our students as interns, putting them into actually getting real-world experience while they're doing their course. The other component is the academy, and this is really creating the courses to address the skills and infrastructure needs of the medtech industry. So we have this continuum of what it takes to get a device to market. So you can take an idea through to a prototype. This can be done within that university environment, and it often is. More and more, though, the companies are coming up with ideas themselves and developing prototypes. But then it does need to start to get out of universities and more into companies, and to take it through validating prototypes, taking that validated prototype through to manufacturing. That's probably one of the hardest things to do in Australia at the moment, and then get to that compliant manufacturing at scale. A good example, I think, is Cochlear, one of the biggest success stories in Australia, where they are even still struggling to produce at scale because there's still a need for that particular device for a lot of handmade components to it, working very hard to try to create new versions of the bionic ear that can be maybe manufactured more efficiently. So across this, we need workers who are skilled in innovating and progressing products through that pathway, but also workers that are skilled in doing the work, installing the systems, doing the operations, doing the manufacturing. So it's wonderful to have the partnership across the universities, especially the dual sector universities, because we can bring vocational education into this as well. So we're looking at creating courses at the vocational education level, undergraduate, master's and PhD, as well as short courses that the Hub can offer directly, and micro certifications, primarily for people in industry who want to come and skill up in different areas. One of the key developments that has been very successful at the University of Melbourne, created in 2016, that has sort of led to us really being more interested in this, has been what's called the Biodesign Innovation Program. This is a program we've been teaching that to students who are enrolled in engineering degrees and business degrees. So we bring engineering students and MBA business students together to form teams to look at to be taught how to innovate in medical technologies. It's based on a Stanford program that was created around about 2000. The idea here is to put the need first, and this is quite this can be a bit of a hurdle sometimes for university researchers. Is that often we have a gadget and then we go look where can we find an application of our gadget. But we teach the students to think, where is the need first? And that's done by actually going out into the hospital environment, talking to clinicians, talking to paramedics, nurses, patients even, to find where are the unmet needs. And the teams that comprise, every team has to have engineering and business students in it. They find dozens of unmet needs, and they then have to go screen those needs, validate them, and say, if we were to solve this need, would there be a market for this device? Once they've settled on their need, then we allow them to come up with concepts to meet that need. And finally, they implement it. And implementation is not just building a prototype device, but also at the end of the course, the year-long course, having a business plan for how to take that to market. So roughly half the teams that have been through it, we normally run between 4 to 7 teams each year, half of them have gone on after the program to spin out a company based on their device. So we've had around 25 spin-out companies over the last 9 years. Some of them have folded, which is what we would expect, but some of them are going strong. And I've shown some examples here. I've chosen these 4 because all 4 have been supported by the Victorian government, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful support for them. Lenexa Medical relates to is pressure injury measurement. So they're using fabrics put onto mattresses to measure risk of pressure injury. And they actually already have TGA, FDA approvals, and they're selling their devices now. But again, they are stuck at this point of how to manufacture at quantity. They can manufacture a few, but not so many. Ventora and Navi are both neonatal intensive care devices. Navi should be hearing in the next few weeks back from the Food and Drug Administration in the US of approval for their device. And Vism, an eye drop company. Very dynamic, some engineering students straight out of university becoming entrepreneurs. Business students are usually more along the pathway. They've been in industry for a while in different areas. I think that they work very well together. So just to wrap up, on the right there is the picture of the ACMD that's being constructed at the moment on the corner of Victoria and Nicholson Streets. It will be the home of the Victorian MedTech Skills and Devices Hub. We're currently located in interim time in the Melbourne Connect precinct. We think it's very important that we engage within these new precincts where there's multiple partners. Industry will be covering, lots of clinicians coming through and so on. So that's it from me, and I think we move into a question session.
Thank you, David. Can we get all 3 of our speakers up here on the platform? I have a number of questions here I'm ready to go with, but do we have any burning questions from the audience? Yes, up the back there.
Firstly, thanks for dedicating your lives to making our lives better. It's really a good thing you're doing. Have you noticed a decline in local manufacturing since tariff protections were taken down in the late 90s? Is there anything that we need to do to onshore our manufacturing, especially after we saw the risks from COVID? Also, are there any legislative changes that need to be made to, say, artificial intelligence to continue helping you grow at the rate that you're growing?
I think to strengthen our local manufacturers, they need to be engaged in external markets. So tariffs are something which do exist in other jurisdictions. I don't think I hear any advocacy for reintroducing similar sorts of things. But since COVID, the global supply chain in medtech has been severely disrupted. And when we talk to procurement people within the health system, within hospitals, they are still struggling for very basic stuff. At the moment, there's a shortage on saline solution. We don't manufacture saline in Victoria. I think there's one manufacturer who closed down their plant in WA. And so there are some reasons for supporting local manufacture to encourage supply chain assurity. And where the purchase decisions are only around cost, then that obviously works against building some sort of security of supply. So I think there's some opportunities to have a look at those sorts of mechanisms. To your questions about AI, that is a very rapidly growing area in health. Very active area, and we've got some great technologies, companies, skills within Australia. So I think that's a huge opportunity for us. The regulators are still internationally trying to understand how to deal with this, and our TGA is very well engaged with the development industry as well. So I think we've got a terrific opportunity for some leadership in this area as well. So something certainly to watch.
Maybe David want to comment on this as well?
I think especially in the AI, it's very, one of the strengths of AI is its ability to adapt as more data comes in. And that's one of the areas that we're focusing on in this ARC training center in cognitive computing for medical technologies. That the strength of it is that as you get more data, the system can be better. But in the regulatory system, it's very hard to deal with that because you need to lock down a product and show when it works well and when it fails. And if you're changing the algorithm every day, it could even be you've got less surety about when that algorithm might fail, even though you could say it's going to be better. But proving that and ensuring the safety of people, or knowing when it might be unsafe, it can be that's one of the main issues with the regulatory situation.
Take that back. I'm going to ask Madhu. We got a nice discussion from David on the skills that the MedTech Hub is looking at. Would you like to also comment whether there are other skills or what skills you think are important in terms of your industry?
I think David covered it beautifully, because there are all the people we train up, and there are all these SMEs we are now working with, who are all hoping to be successful and set up their own prototyping areas and manufacturing industries, but then we don't have too many people to go in there and work. A case in point is even the Discovery to Device Centre, the Victorian MedTech prototyping facility. We had great difficulty trying to find anyone who can actually come in and work in those labs and actually operate any of those equipment. The other issue we have is we have sometimes overtrained people working in those labs, because that's the only ones we can get. We have a lot of PhD students who have finished their PhDs who then choose to do these kind of positions as well. So that's another skills. They have the right skills, but they're not getting remunerated at the right level. So that's a different kind of a problem which we have as well, because not everyone wants to be an academic. Not everybody wants to, I guess, go and be entrepreneur and start up their own industry, but we need a lot of skills to actually run these labs. And it again goes back to the upskilling as well, which is, I'm hoping some of these micro-credentials and the TAFE courses might help doing, because a lot of the people we are trying to sell these technologies to are people who have gone through universities back in the 70s or 80s or 90s, and things have shifted enormously in that space. So hoping to get some of them back into university and get upskilled to actually embrace technologies.
Anybody else here? No? I'm going to see if there's another question from the audience. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask a question. I'm a surgeon and medtech entrepreneur perspective. Errol, you mentioned a lot of things at the start, the size of the industry, the number of people that are employed, and the fact that we only have a 2% sovereign manufacturing capability. When medtech companies or people in my position are engaging with politicians or bureaucrats, what is the best way for me to say something that resonates, that gets them to buy in to my journey? And I don't mean to give me money, but I mean to be interested enough to shepherd me through the journey. So what do I need to do, and what are Victorian companies doing wrong?
I guess the first thing, and we spoke a little bit before we started this session, is to connect in with the skills and experiences which are around in our system. So we do have a reasonable sized medtech community here. The point I was trying to make in my talk was that we are very good at developing up to prototype level, but once it gets to volume manufacture, we struggle. And then once we get to mass marketing and distribution, we don't get access to the public sector markets within our system. The reason for that, particularly in accessing our public sector markets, is because the drivers and the incentives are all built for cost reduction. There are no drivers in our system to enhance benefits, whether it's patient benefit or long-term cost benefit back to society. And often, and this is typically true in medicine, medtech, the saving which is generated up front by stopping people from getting sicker, for example, is not realized by the people who have to pay for that additional cost. And so one of the things that I think we need to become more sophisticated at is a whole of economy impact, to understand how adjusting one thing here has a longer term benefit somewhere else. We're struggling because of the fragmented nature of the way we've built health delivery. So I guess if I was talking to a young entrepreneur, though, trying to get their products up and going, and some of the ones were up on the screen there, Navi is a great example. A local innovation, got up to prototype funding, sourced local funding, government support, but also has got local venture capital funding support. When I talk to them, are very experienced entrepreneurs who's chairing their boards and guiding them, are very excited about this American announcement, which they're hoping for soon, which will enable them to sell on the US market. Will they sell in Victoria? No, not interested. It's too hard, it's too small, it's too difficult. It'll be much easier to build a successful company in the US. And when I ask them, well, when do you reckon we'll be able to get it available for clinicians here? Well, maybe 5 or 10 years. So, if you tap into the experience, which was what your question was, go overseas, be successful there. But what I'd like to do is to advocate for local patients. How do we get our fair share of the innovations that are coming out of the clever people here? Can I just share one other story? In my former company, we were doing a product development of a diagnostic for third world countries, and the program was funded by the Gates Foundation, and the prime contractor was a Seattle-based company. And the Seattle-based company, at one of our project meetings, sat down with us here in Melbourne and said, why is it that Melbourne is so world-renowned for medtech? And all of us engineers looked at each other and went, are we? Who says that? And the Seattle guy says, it's well known. If you want medical technologies, innovation, go to Melbourne. We didn't even realize that we were seen overseas as the innovation place. What we don't do is the next step, and that's the bit that's so hard here.
Thank you, Errol. I'm just going to see if there's one more burning question in the audience. Yep.
In terms of the defence example, what differences do you see that would have to be applied to the medtech sector in policy terms? Because obviously defence is one massive buyer with a market that's producing very technical, big things on a smaller scale. What changes would be needed in the medtech sector for the procurement processes to be adjusted correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean, the buyer of medtech, if you look at public sector procurement, is one massive buyer. The decision to purchase individual items is devolved through the system, and it's a lot more complicated than perhaps defence. But that's something that we just need to deal with, I think. From a policy perspective, the drivers for how to get onto the public procurement lists are all around cost reduction. And so if we ask around sovereign capability, assurity of supply, second sourcing, we ran out of epidural kits 2 years ago. We just couldn't get any epidural kits in the system. And we had clinicians daily ringing other hospitals to find out who had an epidural kit in their drawer. These things cost $50. And then they would put it for $400 into a courier and drive it from one hospital to another. Why? Because we wanted to save an extra $1 on the international supply of those. Now, this is what I meant about the long-term, the linked benefits are not necessarily linked with the people who are incentivized to make the decisions. So I think there's some possibilities for some policy frameworks that allow us to look at a more connected system.
We have just about run out of time. I think Errol's had his fair share of the floor. So I'm going to let Madhu and David finish just with a final word, but particularly one of the questions I had going was whether you see examples of best practice globally and where they might be. But otherwise, open to you to make a final comment.
I think for me, I would have to say the United States, but it's just because they've had so many more years at it. We have a lot of medtech companies, but they're all running the same race. So I think in 10 years or 15 years from now, we'll all be much wiser. But unfortunately, not everyone's able to share those journeys right now because everyone's along the same pathways. But we don't borrow enough, I feel, from the US. We're still risk averse. Talk to me. I know the pain points of trying to take any IP out of the university to run anything out. We're still risk averse. We still think a lot about what could go wrong rather than all the things which can go right. And I think until that changes, hopefully then it'll accelerate things a lot faster.
Yeah, one of the most exciting places that I see is Minnesota. So the Medical Alley. So this is where Medtronic is based. They are the largest medical device manufacturer in the world. And it's not just because Medtronic is there, but because people who Medtronic purchases from other companies the components that they need for their devices. And so those companies have located themselves in that area. And so it's built up an ecosystem. But also on the other hand, there's people who work at Medtronic who then leave Medtronic and go into other companies and greatly build up the skill levels within them. So I think that in terms of the connectedness that Errol was talking about, that's the sort of thing that I sort of really, really dream for Victoria to have. To sort of have some sort of it maybe it doesn't have to be exactly like that, but have that anchor, one or two anchor companies. Much like the way it's developing in the pharmaceutical space now with BioNTech and Moderna and so on, and CSL, building up a strong backbone to the system that will help the rest of it to grow.
We have run out of time, so let me thank all our speakers again, Errol, Madhu and David, for a really interesting seminar. I'll let you... Just note, if you would like to follow up, please contact the library, Deborah, Carolyn, Annie, and they can happily put you in touch with the speakers or provide more information. This is the last presentation for 2024, but we welcome you back next year for a sequence of 4 presentations. So thank you very much.